Pro Bono Happy Hour. I'm Rena Gleaser. Welcome back. Today's guest is Margaret Richards from Husch Blackwell. Margaret spoke to us from Kansas City, where she is based. We discussed her career and role at the firm, its pro bono program, how pro bono fuels her soul, that's a great phrase of hers, and more. We hope you enjoy our conversation. Hi, Margaret. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be part of the podcast.
Let's jump right in. Tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, where you went to school, how you became you.
Okay. Gosh, I guess it's interesting as to where I want to start. So my family's originally from Chicago and relocated to Montana when I was pretty little. And so to go from the big, big city of Chicago to kind of a small town in Montana was an adjustment, but luckily I was pretty little. So grew up in Montana, was raised there in a family with 4 brothers and very hardworking parents. So from there, I moved to the Leavenworth, Kansas City area and attended a Catholic university out here that really just emphasized core values of service, justice, respect, and that really just kind of continued to inspire me as I went on my career journey. And then after a few years of working here in the Kansas City area after college, moved to Lansing, Michigan, which was a little bit closer to where my older brothers live. So I had an opportunity to kind of spend some more quality time with them and was up there for law school. So that's sort of what got me to kind of initially becoming a lawyer and how I got that far.
So let's dig a little deeper into that. Why did you become a lawyer?
Yeah, so, it wasn't something that I had this lifelong dream of. I didn't have any family members that were lawyers, so I wasn't really quite sure what to expect. And so after college, I knew there was another career path for me. Coming out of school, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, but I was sure that I didn't want to take on a lot more school debt. And so I kind of considered some different opportunities to sort of figure out what the next steps were, and got the opportunity to work for a firm here in Kansas City just to get a real insight as to what the legal practice was all about. So I worked for about 3 years as a paralegal and just fell in love with the whole experience, and that's sort of what solidified, like, this is it. I want to be a lawyer and I want to go to law school. So just really having that really in-depth career experience before I dove right into law school was what really inspired me to take the plunge and go off to school. So
my sense is that's become a bit of conventional wisdom, right? Advising people, go out, get some real-world experience, be really sure this is what you want to do, especially given the cost of a legal education these days. There aren't so many babies like me who went straight through that era is kind of come and gone. So right. Thanks to our expert crack research team, we found that you've said that, direct quote from you, pro bono fuels your soul. I love that line. What do you mean by that?
I think that ultimately as a practicing attorney I spent about 10 years practicing, a little over 10 years practicing, and just wasn't really fulfilled. And when I think back as to the cases that really truly made the biggest difference in my life and made me feel like I was making a difference in other people's lives was my pro bono work. And so I think that ultimately is kind of the career path I chose to take after being a practicing attorney for a while is this stuff fuels my soul, and I need to make this my full-time focus. So yeah, it just keeps me going. There's work that feeds our bodies and keeps a house over our head, and then there's work that feeds our souls. And I think being able to be part of the pro bono world certainly feeds my soul.
So let's talk a little bit about your career journey and how did you get to Husch Blackwell?
Yeah, so as I was just saying, I spent the first 10 years or so of my practice as a litigator, and although I did some transactional and regulatory work over the years, primarily in the environmental arena. and just, but during that time, I always made time for pro bono. And the last year or so of my practice, just wasn't feeling quite fulfilled. And I knew sort of what the future looked like moving forward to the hierarchy of the law firm, and just knew that's not where I wanted to be, that I kept being drawn back to my pro bono work, and again, how it fueled my soul, right, and how I felt so much more fulfilled doing that work. And so I just spent a lot of time soul searching that last year, and okay, how do I transition into a career that's so much more focused on social justice and access to justice issues, and to make that happen. And so luckily for me, Husch Blackwell had decided about that time to create a full-time director of pro bono services position. They had somebody in this role who was just amazing before I got here, but she wore many, many different hats. And so when she took an opportunity at another firm, Husch decided they wanted somebody committed to doing the pro bono work here at the firm full-time, and really just sort of directing and managing that program full-time. So it opened this huge door for me and really fulfilled that need that I was looking for to be able to do this work full-time.
That's awesome. And we'll do a shout out to Jenny Schwindeman. She left a good legacy for you. And I remember meeting you right when you were starting, right? Sort of very early in your tenure as you took up the baton and enlarged your portfolio at the firm. So before we talk more about your role and your job, could you tell us a little bit about the firm for people who aren't familiar with it?
Yeah, so Husch Blackwell is an industry-focused firm, and so it's a little bit different setup than some other firms. So we actually are divided up into strategic business units. So the ultimate focus of our attorneys is sort of getting to be experts in a particular industry. And then within that industry group of experts, they are divided up a little bit more traditionally, as firms typically are, into practice specialties. But so the overall reaching goal of the firm is to be industry focused. So that's kind of what drives us and leads us. We have a little over 700 lawyers across 18 different offices. I think we're in 9 different states, and then we also have an office in the Washington, D.C. area, in your area. So we have a pretty big footprint, although we're primarily mostly in the Midwest regions.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about your role at the firm. You mentioned you're the director of pro bono services. How do you spend your time?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one, and I think as many people have heard on your podcast in the past, and being a listener of your podcast, I certainly heard this on numerous occasions as well, is that, every day is different. Which is just, I think, keeps this job fresh and exciting and that kind of stuff. So most of my time is spent administering the pro bono program. So this includes opening and approving new pro bono cases, recruiting attorneys and paralegals to work on those cases, and then working hand in hand with our firm leadership to promote and encourage pro bono engagement. I spend quite a bit of my time also building relationships with legal services providers across the Husch Blackwell footprint, so that we have sort of a pipeline for what's going on in the access to justice arena in our local areas, so that I can try to connect our attorneys to those opportunities.
So you mentioned getting paralegals involved. How do you get paralegals involved, and what do they do to help advance your pro bono efforts?
So a lot of the paralegal work that we do is that just, as they would work on any other cases. Certainly our paralegals are just as committed and interested in getting engaged on our pro bono cases as our attorneys are. So I really try to find ways to make sure that we're engaging them as well. And so most of it's in a support role for our attorneys, whether it's, organizing documents and pleadings, maintaining records for nonprofits that they're filing their tax exempt paperwork and, all that kind of stuff that they do yearly and that kind of stuff, keeping everybody on track. So they do a great job of just supporting our trial teams and attorneys in various ways. So
as I listen to how you spend your time. There are a lot of different aspects and elements to your job. And I'm sure your to-do list is long and there are items on it that are always a challenge to get to. Are there things, either practical tasks or aspirational goals, that you wish you could be doing more of?
Yeah, I wish I could be doing a lot more of this indirect connections with our attorneys, making that so much more of the time I spend during my day. It's obviously part of my day, getting to know what our attorneys are passionate about, what types of pro bono projects they want to work on, and then working to find the perfect pro bono opportunity for them to meet that passion, to meet that interest. So I would love it if I could be doing so much more of that, a bigger portion of my day. And I think part of it right now is just, going with the administration and management of the program also involves things like regularly checking of hours and working with supervisors and staffing of cases and all of the very important things that also go into this job. But yeah, so if I had a wish list of something I would be able to do a lot more, would be just sort of really working one-on-one with our attorneys to find them exactly what it is they're passionate about and then how to get them engaged in doing that pro bono work and making a difference.
Yeah, it's a super valuable effort, but it takes a lot of time. So it's very time intensive.
Especially with 700 some lawyers. So it's on my radar and something I try to do every single day.
So tell me what you enjoy most about your job. What are the favorite things that you get to do?
I think my favorite thing is really just seeing how pro bono has impacted our attorneys. I mean, certainly from the quote we talked about earlier, it feeds my soul, right? I know the difference pro bono work has made in my life. And so being able to see other attorneys experience some of that as well and just grow in their own careers, whether they call me because they had this great opportunity to argue, an oral argument in front of the Seventh Circuit. And they want to be an appellate lawyer and getting that opportunity right away early on in their career, and just the excitement that comes through the attorney's voice. Because I was able to help this person, but I also got this great experience and, knowing that it's also making such a significant impact on others' lives. It's whether it's the clients that we're serving or it's our attorneys that are getting these great experiences and are feeling the rewards from doing the work. I think that's one of my favorite just aspects of what I get to do.
So piggybacking on that, the enjoyment, the satisfaction that you see in having the attorneys and others at the firm have great experiences, how do you make the case, right? What have you found works best to incentivize and encourage lawyers at the firm to do pro bono work, especially people who maybe haven't gotten involved so far? Do you have any tricks or tips that you found to be especially effective?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple different areas that I've tried to sort of do to incentivize some of the pro bono work. Ultimately, I think one of the areas is really just trying to highlight the wonderful professional development skills, in particular our young lawyers gain from doing pro bono. I think that helps to incentivize the younger lawyers to get involved, because they're excited to get that chance to take or defend depositions, to go to court early on and really have direct client work so early on in their careers. And so just to be able to highlight those stories and this great professional development skills they're getting out of that, and making sure I'm communicating with their supervisors that they got to do this and this is what they learned from it and this is how they felt, just being able to share those experiences, working with them to highlight this great pro bono work they're getting to do, whether it's in, articles in local bar journals for them, highlighting their work through, numerous pro bono awards that are available throughout the country, so that they're getting that recognition for this great work that they're doing. I think another great way that I'm able to incentivize some of our lawyers is we have some firm leaders who just are very passionate about pro bono work and make it a very big part of their own careers here. And so highlighting the fact that, for example, our office managing partner for our Omaha office both the one who, just left that role and the person who was just appointed to that role. Both of those are partners at our firm, very busy partners, but made pro bono both part of their careers. And so to see that and to show firm-wide, not only is this great for our young associates, our partners are taking the initiative and being part of this program. And so I think that incentivizes the rest of our group to get on board. And so it's certainly a struggle because it doesn't work for everybody. And so trying to figure out what's going to get everybody engaged is something I'm working on. But ultimately seeing these great examples of attorneys, young and experienced, I almost said old, young and experienced, doing this work is just, I think, the biggest way that we can really encourage others that to get engaged, because it certainly makes a huge difference to our clients.
And thank you for mentioning leadership's role, because I think firm leadership plays a critical aspect to running and administering and having a successful law firm pro bono program. What are we talked a little bit about time and having to make priorities and decisions, but what are some of the other greatest challenges for you in your role?
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge I have right now is just overall, ways to increase firm engagement in the pro bono program. We have wonderful support here at the firm for our pro bono program from the highest levels. And with that support, I would love to see us have just that much more engagement. And, as many of us know, attorneys are busy. And so finding time, even for those busiest attorneys, and matching them with just the right pro bono opportunity that fits their interest and fits their time availability, I think is one way I can sort of attack that challenge. But certainly that's my biggest challenge right now is how do I get that much more engagement across the firm? We've got the people who are extremely committed and raise their hand often, but how do I reach those people that maybe have never taken on a pro bono case and encourage them to do so?
Speaking of across the firm, you mentioned that the firm has 18 offices. By the time this episode airs, maybe it'll be 19, 20, right? Who knows? How do you manage them all from Kansas City?
Yeah, so that is quite tricky. My first year here, I spent quite a bit of my time just traveling amongst our offices and getting to know those attorneys, getting to know the local legal services entities and access to justice committees or commissions or whatever it may be in those local areas, and building those relationships early on. So there was quite a bit of travel in my first year, just like I said, getting to know my colleagues, getting to know the legal environment in those areas. So that had a lot to do with it. On my wish list is actually implementing a pro bono liaison program, which would have an attorney in our local offices that's sort of responsible for helping to recruit and engage and encourage pro bono at that local level. I think that's going to be really helpful, especially since I'm trying to kind of develop and lead this program from Kansas City. I obviously can't be everywhere where we have our offices. And so having somebody that understands, what might be happening in Denver, which is going to be very different than what's going on in Chattanooga or Madison, Wisconsin, or, some of the other places that we're at. And so having that local liaison, I think is going to be pretty key to helping that. We certainly have some attorneys who've taken that upon their initiative and have done that on their own, and we're seeing some success in our pro bono work in those offices where that's happened. So I hope to just sort of expand upon that in a very strategic way moving forward.
Great. So listeners, stay tuned. We'll have Margaret back to talk about the firm's liaison program when it is up and running, and she's got some best practices and tips for us on that front. I want to kind of deep dive a little into Kansas City. I have such happy memories of our law firm project trip to Kansas City. So I want to reminisce in my mind. Will you talk a little bit about the pro bono and access to justice culture there? What's going on? What are the most pressing legal needs? What have you seen change and evolve? What's going on in the community?
Yeah, so, Kansas City is it's a very philanthropic city, and it's so wonderful to be part of the pro bono community here, because it's certainly no exception to that. I know a number of my Kansas City colleagues have mentioned this on the podcast before, in that Kansas City has a unique local rule. So if you are an attorney here and you practice, you have an office in Kansas City, specifically Jackson County, or you live in Jackson County, you're automatically added to this juvenile court abuse, neglect, and delinquency court appointment list. So as a result, most of the large firms here in Kansas City have had a dedicated pro bono attorney that specializes in this work, and they've had somebody in that role for a very long time. So Kansas City just continued, I think, to expand sort of that pro bono engagement here in the city. To much other different areas, because obviously Kansas City, like many of our other places, does have access to justice issues, and there's still a great need for attorneys to volunteer to help close that justice gap. I think in 2017 there were still nearly 20% of Missourians who were below 125% of the federal poverty level, and as many of us know, they face such numerous legal needs. And so there's certainly a lot of legal needs still out there. I would say in Kansas City we see a lot of what you see everywhere else, from domestic violence and people who need orders for protection, from guardianships to landlord-tenant types cases. So it's just a wide range, and I don't think anything's necessarily purely unique to Kansas City. I think we experience quite a few of these same access to justice issues across the country. I think in Kansas City we have, at least on the pro bono side of things, we have a very close group of pro bono professionals who I think you were able to meet, most of us, if not all of us, when you were here, when PBI did their Kansas City visit a few years ago, and then the St. Louis visit we had right after I started. So we've got, most of us are located here in Kansas City that are part of this group. We have two that we've adopted from the St. Louis area, and then one who actually is with a firm that's headquartered out of Chicago, but happens to live here, so she's been a great addition to our group. And so we collaborate on such a great level to sort of fill this pro bono this access to justice gap that's here in Kansas City. In my experience of being an attorney, law firms tend to be very competitive nature, right? We're vying for clients. We're vying for the key projects and work, and so it's much more competitive. But in the pro bono world, there's such a great need, and this just gives us a chance to come together to address those legal needs for the most disadvantaged in our communities in a very different, collaborative, and great way. It's a very supportive network, and I'm so honored to be part of this group here.
Yeah, it's great. I definitely think that Kansas City, St. Louis extended community is a great example of what we think of as competitors in the marketplace and collaborators in pro bono. So, Margaret, you are a regular and loyal listener of the podcast. We love that. So you probably know that we have a relatively new segment called Tell Us About Your First Time. So could you tell us about one of your first or one of your early pro bono matters?
Yes. So it's certainly not my first because I had some, under that court rule I'd mentioned earlier, some abuse and neglect cases, which were really my first pro bono experiences as an attorney. But I want to talk about the one that really impacted me the most. And this one came up within a few years of my practice, maybe about year 4 or 5. I was asked by Legal Aid of Western Missouri through their voluntary attorney project to take on a probate matter, specifically a determination of heirship. At the time, and really still today, I knew next to nothing about probate cases. I want to say pro bono, and so it's hard to go back and say probate. for probate, I was an environmental lawyer, had never been to probate court, didn't know anything about their forms and the kind of stuff that went into that, but certainly had a mentor through legal aid. I also have a friend here in Kansas City that specializes in elder law. And when I mentioned, hey, I've got this probate case, can you kind of guide me through how this works? She was just a great sort of mentor for me to get up to speed to take this on and be able to assist the client. It was not a case that had, that was overly complex. It didn't have complex legal issues. It certainly was not a complicated legal matter whatsoever. But that being said, it was the whole world to this guy. He was an elderly gentleman who had moved back home to care for his ailing mother. And after a few years, she passed away. After a few years after that, the house was put up on the auction block. And so, this was an ability to keep this guy in his house, right? Keep the roof over his head. He was retired. He had an extremely limited retirement pension. And so, there wasn't any money to pay a lawyer. There wasn't any money to get him out of this legal issue that he was having. And so just to be able to work hand in hand with him, providing legal means, but it was also providing support, going with him down to the county city hall and saying, this paperwork's not right, do it again. Just a little bit more hand holding than I think we do for our other clients really made the day. And just one quick story related to this. In one of our client meetings, it happened to be on the same day that the firm was having its fancy holiday party. And we had great views of Kansas City, great food, great music. It was a party, great social atmosphere. And so after we finished our meeting, I said, please grab yourself some food, enjoy some music, get a drink if you'd like a drink, that kind of stuff. Like, you're a client, you're welcome to be part of this. And he just thought, you mean I can actually partake in all of this? As if I don't belong here because I'm not a paying client. And I reassured him, that he was welcome, and just to see his face light up that, wow, you throw such a great party just for me, and it made the whole experience so enjoyable. But at the end of this case, the man was crying, gave me this huge hug as we walked out of probate court. And he just said, you've helped me stay in my house, right? I now still have a place to live because of your work, and was crying and gave me this huge hug. And I'll never forget that. And I think, how often do our clients give us hugs, and to be part of that, and to be part of something that was just relatively easy for me to do, but such a significant impact on his life, ultimately sort of guided me to how I ended up making this a focus of my career today.
Yeah, making a real difference in someone's lives, right? Using your legal skills and your talents to really help someone. I love the other undercurrent of your story, the holiday party, which is very much about treating our pro bono clients in a similar way to our corporate clients, right? If some are invited, others are invited as well. And our best practices are transferable, and that we're not giving sort of second-class treatment, or we're not taking shortcuts. And I know that we do a lot of writing and thinking about that. And I think that hospitality doubles down and reinforces that message as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So could you share some other examples of pro bono matters that have been particularly meaningful to you, either that you've handled or that other people at the firm have been working on, that you're excited and interested to share?
Yeah, so, we've got some really interesting ones that I think our firm's been able to take on over the years, or at least that I've been able to see in the year and a half that I've been here. One of which was a court-appointed case where our attorneys were asked to represent the family of an Iraqi war veteran who came back from Iraq and had pretty severe PTSD and ultimately committed suicide. And so in this case, it was alleged that there was negligent medical care provided to this veteran. And so really the family was seeking support to help raise this veterans' children, but also just trying to make some changes so that other veterans didn't get the same level of care, right, to prevent this problem from happening in the future. And so our attorneys just hit the ground running with this case. It was a senior counsel and then 2 younger associates, and they were able to do expert depositions and discovery and, all of that kind of stuff that we would expect, but they were also able to try this case in federal court and handle experts and handle openings and closings, and for these younger attorneys, it just made a very huge impact, not only on their professional development, but again, on their personal lives. And they were just so happy to be part of that and get the result that they were able to get in that case. So it's so great to see this work in action and how it helps them grow professionally, but also personally as individuals. We've also done other work that, in the pro bono world, it's not all warm and fuzzy, right? There's tough cases. And so we've been involved recently with a partnership with the MacArthur Justice Center on cases here in Missouri that involve the juveniles' life without parole. And so working with these individuals as young adults. I would hate even saying young adults because they truly were juveniles. And there's lots of studies out there that now say, juveniles just haven't developed it the same way. And so to treat them as if they were adults in convicting them of these sentences of life without parole just doesn't make sense. And as the Supreme Court has said now, this needs to change. And so working on those cases to give these people the opportunity to have meaningful parole hearings has been interesting to see, and our attorneys are very dedicated on working with them and trying to make a difference for these juveniles who have spent quite a bit of time now locked up. Some other examples of some stuff that have been pretty meaningful to the firm have been, so we're part of the Missouri Coalition for the Right to Counsel. This is a group that was put together because of burdens people were seeing with the public defender system here, right? And we all have seen that in many, many different cities. Our public defenders are underfunded and they're overworked, and oftentimes the people that get hurt by that are people who are convicted of a crime and maybe aren't getting the best and greatest legal defense for that. And so private firms and private attorneys volunteered to help take on those cases. The Public Defender's Office put together an amazing training to support attorneys who, don't practice in the criminal law arena, and to provide them with the support and guidance and that kind of stuff in taking on these cases. And so we've taken on a few of these criminal cases, and our attorneys have just really enjoyed getting to handle these. And in fact, they come in with just boxes and boxes of stuff and have had the court clerk say, this is a criminal case, right? Not a civil case. And our attorneys have said, yes, and we are ready to go. And they're just excited to try those cases and get the trial experience in particular. And to see the excitement they're having, just gaining those opportunities has been fun.
We had a really great session at our conference on this effort in Missouri, and it's such a great program. I hope that it will be able to be replicated around the country. They've done such a great job, and the law firms are just really doing amazing work, and it's such a great collaboration. Yeah.
I know our teams certainly have really enjoyed it. We usually staff these cases with three attorneys, a partner, and then or a partner, a senior counsel, and then 2 different levels of associates. And the goal is really just to provide that professional development that comes from that, but also the mentoring with having a case team set up this way. And by having 3 people on it, the goal is also to try to balance out the work so that the burden of all the pro bono work doesn't just fall on one person, right? They can really tackle the strategy of the case with all 3 of them and work through it. So it's been really kind of fun to see that program develop.
That's great. Did you have any others you wanted to share before we talked about something else? I didn't want to cut you off if there were other projects or activities you wanted to share.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are the main ones. Obviously, the firm also has a human trafficking clinic. I think it's probably, and I don't know if it was the first, but one of the first of the programs like this in the country. And we work closely with survivors of human trafficking. And just they have so many different types of legal issues that come up through that, and so we're able to work with them, whether it's expungement or landlord-tenant issues or debt issues, or it's just the whole range of legal issues that they have is huge. So we're able to work pretty closely with them, and there's a lot of pride our firm has in that program in particular.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. So we've talked a lot about professional development and mentoring, and it's spring, almost summer associate season. Could you share some advice for law students and lawyers who are just starting their careers?
Yes, I'm so glad that you asked that, actually. I'm pretty excited about a program we have here in particular for our summer associates that's a pro bono competition. We actually started it last year, so this is the second year because we had so much fun with it. And I think the advice I would give is, if you're truly passionate about pro bono and giving back to communities and being sort of somebody that's committed to that, which we hear this over and over again from our law schools and our law students, is that that's important to them, right? So when you come into a firm, engage in that work. Find out, if the firm has somebody like me who's kind of leading the pro bono department, talk to them, get names of attorneys and projects that are doing pro bono work, and figure out ways that you can get involved with that. But because I think early on in our careers, if you make that an important part of your practice, you'll continue that on throughout your career. Two prime examples of that at Husch. Last year, we were able to implement actually the Husch Blackwell Pro Bono Champion Award. And the two people that we gave that to are senior counsel. They've had long, storied careers here at the firm, just very distinguished attorneys. And they made pro bono part of their practice when they were young, brand new attorneys. Whether it was them walking down across the street to the local legal aid, 40 years ago, whatever the case may be, and saying, I would like to help, I work at this firm down the street, I would like to volunteer my time, and just getting engaged really early on. And that drove sort of their practice throughout the years. And they always found ways, whether they were really, really busy, they found ways to make pro bono part of their practice early on. And so I think when you come in the door, whether you're a summer associate or a first-year associate, whatever the case may be, engage in what you're passionate about. And I think then you're going to have that much more reward that comes with it, because you're making a difference, and you're truly helping people.
That's great advice. So switching gears, Margaret, if you had a magic wand, what one thing would you change about law firm pro bono or access to justice?
Oh, shoot. I don't know. I think I need a big wand.
Yeah, for more wishes, right? For more wishes, yeah.
I think there's probably a few things that I'd like to change. And I think it's sort of twofold, right? I think we need, threefold. I just thought of a third. So one, I think you start with additional funding for legal services. And I think that's because, legal services entities really are at the heart of connecting those who need access to justice the most with our actual legal system, right? So by providing the support that's needed to make sure legal services entities can run and identify the needs in their areas, I think is key. I think the next part of that then goes into making sure we have attorneys engaged in that, right? So it can't just all be legal services entities. We need the volunteer lawyers to step up and say, okay, I want to help. I will help legal aid, or I'll help a nonprofit, or whatever the case may be, that they're volunteering to take that on. So I don't think you can have one without the other, right? And then the third I think I would add to this is, maybe trying to figure out ways that we can make true systemic changes in our legal communities. So right now, our legal work, and especially on the pro bono front, is very reactive in nature, right? Landlord-tenant issues. We're dealing with problem landlords not maintaining, their facilities to have a safe and habitable environment for the tenants. So instead of always just being reactive and going to court and making sure that tenant has access to justice and fighting the landlord or whatever the case may be, really working with our cities on ways to provide better housing, and whether it's punishment programs for landlords that just are subpar, whether it's sort of changing the legal system so that it's more preventative as opposed to reactive, I think has to be part of the conversation as well.
Well, you've made incredibly effective use of your magic wand, so thank you for that.
Well, thanks.
Okay, let's end with this. Who is your pro bono or access to justice role model? And maybe you have more than one, and that would be totally cool.
Okay. Yeah, so this is probably the hardest question I feel like I've had to answer all day. And it's in part, right, how do you pick just one? And so I think I'm going to start with the biggest role models that have really impacted me sort of as I've been navigating this new world of pro bono and how to administer, develop, and implement a program are my Kansas City, St. Louis colleagues, right? Katie Cronin, Michelle Clarity, Jenny Swendelman, who you highlighted earlier, Kate Nolan, Jolie Justice, Sandy Wortel, Kimberly McLean. They really have been instrumental in giving me guidance as I've transitioned from active practice into this role. And so without them and without their support, I think it would have been a lot more stressful, a lot more, it's just, they really were sort of collaborating with me and holding me up and giving me just wonderful advice. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention them, and especially mention them first because they were a big influence for me. I think ultimately when I think of people who I've really looked up to when it comes to this idea of access to justice and pro bono role models, another significant role model to me would certainly be Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She's ultimately a role model for all women, I think, because of her work that she did, really fighting for women's rights, gender equality, and really making some significant changes that she did as a pioneer in that area. And certainly it wasn't just her. There were so many people that fit into that category as well. But growing up in a family with 4 brothers, my parents always encouraged all of us, but specifically me, in this world, it doesn't matter whether you're a boy or girl, you can be whatever you want, right? Like the future's bright, and go out there and get it. And so just having somebody like Justice Ginsburg, who made those strides before me that allowed us to sort of continue and move forward and have those dreams was just a significant role model. And then I'm also inspired by attorneys like Brian Stevenson, who's dedicated his career to helping the poor, working to fight wrongfully incarcerated individuals and just sort of that dedicated work that goes into sort of innocence projects and innocence work that have been a big part of his career. So certainly those are kind of the 3 main buckets of access to justice role models that I've had over my career.
Margaret, that's awesome. Thank you so much for talking with me today. It's been such an inspiring conversation.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure to be here and to move from regular listener of the podcast to now participant. So
great. Thank you. Thank you so much to Margaret for making the time to be with us and for all the great work she's doing. Hey listeners, we'd love to hear from you. Send your comments, feedback, and suggestions to our new email address, lawfirm@probonoinst.org. New and archived episodes of the podcast can be found on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and take a minute to leave a review. It's quick and easy to do. We'd appreciate the feedback, and it would help make it easier for other listeners to find the show and expand the conversation about pro bono and access to justice. And we might just send you some swag in return. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Pro Bono Happy Hour.